All right, guys, cool. So let's get into the biomechanics of how we move on the floor, okay? And the reason that I really want to deep dive into all of this is one, I want it to be helpful in you guys understanding the way that you can move as an athlete. And also I know that I can't be there individually to work with you one-on-one. So I don't want you guys to get frustrated when you're working with another coach or whatever gym it is that you're at and your coach is telling you to do something and you can't do it. Sometimes I found that the reason that you're not capable of doing it isn't because like you're dumb or unathletic or anything like that. It's because you're just attaching yourself to the floor in a different way than maybe your coach can perceive or that you're perceiving yourself. So what I mean is a squared versus a bladed stance is going to have a lot more just different ways of doing it versus one versus the other, okay? So in a bladed stance, what I mean is I'm really on like a balance beam here. My feet are pretty much in line here. A squared stance, I'm gonna stand a lot more here with my body squared up to you, okay? The reason that this is important in understanding footwork in general is because it says what direction you're capable of moving in faster, okay? So when I'm in a bladed stance, my feet are telling me that I can move front and back really well. So I can push forward and I can push backwards. I can push off to the side also, but my feet aren't connected to the floor or driving in at an angle that can propel me as easily left and right as they do forward and backwards. So when I'm pushing off of my front foot, it's because my power is going into the floor at this angle when I'm like this. When I'm in a squared stance, I have more of an ability to push into the floor at this type of angle, which is going to move me left, this type of angle, which is going to move me right, okay? That's really important. The entire course, because this is kind of the style that I have developed on my own, is a little bit of a hybrid of both, okay? So I'm not super square kind of here like a Dutch kickboxer, not like this, but I'm also not super bladed like a TKD guy either. I want to be a little bit of both, okay? So I'm not here, I'm not here, I'm a little bit in between both, okay? I like this type of stance just because it gives you a lot more access to all 360 degrees that you want to be able to move. I can push myself forward, backwards, left, right, angled, you know, where when I'm bladed, I still can, of course, but again, I don't have it in like my trigger finger. Like I don't have my finger on that trigger for me to move left and right as much as I do when I'm a little bit more in a hybrid stance. Just like how when I'm in a squared stance, pushing myself forward and pushing myself backwards isn't as available as me moving left and right, okay? So in this course, we're gonna do a little bit of like a hybrid one, but that's really important because if you're one of those guys, and everyone's different, like I feel like people, the way that they use their feet and their stance and everything is almost like a fingerprint where everyone is super unique and everyone just naturally connects to the floor a lot differently. When I'm teaching people, especially newer people, I'll be like, okay, how does it like make your body powerful in a kickboxing stance, in a staggered stance? And you get a lot of like weird answers. Like some people are like this, some people are like this. Some people kind of do a hybrid of the two. So you kind of have to figure out for yourself. But like I said before, it's really important in understanding that if you're going to stand like this in a really bladed stance and your coach is like, hey, like I want you to step and pivot, that is a step that you can do, but it's not going to be as accessible to you as if you were in a more of a hybrid stance. Stepping and pivoting is a lot easier because I have access to move myself more left and right in this type of stance versus this type of stance. On the same token, when I am in a really squared stance, if your body connects to the floor more naturally like this, which I would recommend too, like whatever you do naturally, as long as it's not like too far outside the box, is cool. You'll just have to navigate different things differently than other people. But when I'm more in a squared stance like this, and your coach is telling you to pull and pop, or like move yourself backwards or have like a TKD bounce, it doesn't really make too much sense when you're in a squared stance. So that I just want to, you know, offer up as a little bit of an important note, just so you guys don't get frustrated when you guys are practicing all this stuff. But like I said, we're going to be in more of a hybrid stance. Okay, so another thing that we need to take into account is how you're built. Okay, everyone's built different, and like I said, it's on a spectrum, but we have people that are built really narrow, and then we have people that are built a little bit thicker, okay? I forget the names of it because I'm not like a biomechanical strength and conditioning guy, but I have been lucky enough to have some of the best coaches in the entire world as far as biomechanics go and strength and conditioning goes. And I'm a narrow body, like, of course, I'm not a super jacked, like thick chested guy. So I have a lot of different things that are going to feel natural and better for me being in this narrow body than people that are in a like a thicker, more grounded body, okay? That's really important because if you're built like me and you're narrow, you're going to be able to float on the floor a lot better. You're also going to be able to probably last a little bit longer because the way that we move doesn't require as much grounding to the floor and making ourselves heavy. So we're not going to be able to like expend as much energy throwing punches typically, okay? Whereas if you're on the other end of the spectrum, on the grounded spectrum, you're not going to be able to float in the air as good as someone that's more narrow, okay? But what you are going to be able to do is connect your feet into the floor and be able to hit really hard. That's obviously super awesome, something that I'm trying to add into my game as well because, of course, being the best, you want to be able to like float and see yourself on different parts of that spectrum, depending on who you're fighting and strategy and all of that stuff. But if you are one of these guys that connects to the floor, you're going to be able to hit really hard. You're going to be able to carve into the floor and move really quickly, but it's going to take a little bit more energy because you are like using a little bit more of your musculature. That's a hard word for me to say. But narrow builds, float really good. You guys need to learn how to ground yourself to the floor a little bit better so that you have both of those really awesome things to your game where you can float, ground, and then punch. The more grounded built guy with the thicker rib cage, kind of like, you know, all of Team Alpha Male back in 2010, pretty much. Thick bodies, like short, ground, and like hit hard as hell, okay? That type of person needs to be able to float on the floor or else they're gonna be pretty easily run into like really heavy things, which obviously is not very good. Another thing to consider, guys, when we're talking striking, because everyone gets into like these super lame like arguments about is boxing better, is Muay Thai better, or like, and then people will try to say that one thing's better in one of the sports and doesn't work in the other part of the sports, and it just becomes like really ridiculous, kind of like silly internet arguments that I see all the time. Boxing, Muay Thai, MMA, Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, all of those things are rule sets, okay? So the way that you do things inside those rule sets is of course going to change. If you're doing a wrestling match and you're in this type of stance, and then next year the rule changes to like, hey man, now we can knee each other in the face. I don't think a lot of people are going to be wrestling like this anymore. And the reason that that's important is because when you're talking about footwork and your stance in general, boxers get away with standing really wide like this, okay? One, because they can throw big power and still stop in their position really, really well, which is super, you know, helpful in boxing. But if I'm standing like this and we can low kick and throw kicks, I'm not gonna have access to those weapons as much as if I was standing in a lot more of a narrow stance, okay? When you see Muay Thai fighters, they don't stand real wide like this because when I kick, I have to push myself onto one of my legs. And that is not super easy, or it is kind of easy, but it's super slow for me to do that in a really wide stance and try to kick. When I'm in a narrow stance, I have super easy access to my kicks because I don't need to do this giant weight shift in order for me to throw my kick. Muay Thai guys stand a lot more narrow. Boxers stand a lot more wide because they don't use these weapons and they can throw big power when they're sitting down into their punches and maintain position. Muay Thai guys, when they're a little bit more narrow, they throw kicks, they have really easy access to all those, but they don't have the ability to stop themselves when they're throwing super heavy punches and elbows and stuff, which is why you see a lot of Thai clinch, because they throw and then a lot of the time they fall into each other because they don't have this really wide stance in order for them to be able to stop, okay? So again, in this instructional, we're gonna do more or less a hybrid of the both. I don't stand super tall like this, but I also don't stand really wide like this because like I said, in MMA, because it's so dynamic, you have to be able to shift and float along that spectrum pretty frequently. So I stand a little bit more of kind of both. Okay, a couple more things. Power, all right, because I know everyone gets such a hard on for power, but you have to be able to know where it comes from so that you can replicate it in all different types of situations, not just in perfect situations where you're grounded to the floor and you throw a really good punch, you stop yourself, you maintain position, because fighting happens in a super dynamic way. All the situations are going to change, and you need to understand how power actually works, okay? So power can be broken down into 3 types of things, okay? It's broken down by momentum, your connection to the floor, and then the rotation in your body. So what I mean by that is my momentum. When I'm connecting to the floor and throwing myself in a direction, that's what makes for a hard punch. When you watch like a shot putter or like a pitcher or a quarterback, everyone throws through like this, okay? Sometimes they'll throw here, but they're definitely not gluing themselves and connecting themselves to the floor, but they are flinging their weight in a way where they're gaining momentum from this drive on the floor, okay? That's really important in fighting because when I'm throwing a punch, I need to understand that my power comes from this push off of the floor and throwing a punch, okay? No matter what the punch is, I typically am using the floor in order to generate a lot of my power, okay? But in striking and in MMA, it's really, really important, of course, to stay in position. So you don't get to launch really hard punches, fall forward like this, as if you're like a pitcher or something like that, okay? In fighting, this is not very good position, okay? So when you're thinking fighting, you have to think position, the way that you connect to the floor and throw punches using this floor, okay? And also catching your momentum so that you could stay into position, okay? The last thing, of course, is rotation. I can't throw a very hard punch not using my body. Even if I use all the floor in the world and don't rotate in my shoulder when I do anything, it's gonna make for kind of like a weird, not super realistic feeling of power in your body. So when you are thinking power, I'm using momentum, I'm using the floor, and I'm using my body to rotate and throw my punches really hard, okay? So that's kind of how power works. All right, so last thing, because I could tell that you guys are getting bored because this stuff kind of bores me too. But like I said, it's really, really important to understand. That way you're able to replicate it throughout your entire game so that you can kind of, you know, find when you're watching your film of your sparring or whatever it is or something feels off, you can watch it and be like, oh, it's because my feet are facing that direction so I don't have push in that way. Or, oh, I'm not getting much power on my punch because I'm not rotating much. Or, oh, I'm not staying in position because I'm flinging my momentum over my leg like that. But the last one that we're going to talk about is our speed, okay? Speed works by using smaller steps, okay? The tinier that I make my steps when I'm using good footwork, the better off you're going to be, okay? And that's because fighting is a reactive thing. It's not just like, it's not like I'm saying hike and running my play, okay? Even though I know that that's not maybe the best example of a reactive scenario because there still is reaction in that. But fighting is a dance, okay? So when we're thinking, I want to be able to react, I can't react as fast if my feet are taking really big steps, okay? I can react and change direction when my feet are hovering above the floor. I don't like sliding because that creates friction and friction makes things slower. But when I'm using good footwork and trying to be fast, I'm keeping my feet glued more or less, or hovering on the floor. So that if I need to, I can hit my brakes. If I need to, I can hit the gas. If I need to, I can change direction. All of that happens and you'll get a lot faster if you use and think of speed in footwork terms of the smaller the better, okay? So that's our biomechanics. I hope that, you know, that wasn't too boring, but it is really important that you guys understand all that. Let's get into our beginner techniques.